a deep fear for me has always been a potential World War III scenario to kind of keep the peace. That's no longer the case, right? Like technology is the greatest deterrent in modern warfare.
This week on the Matthew Bird podcast.
Because the technology is changing so much, there's so many data types, there's so many things you could do with the data.
Clark Yuan, U.S. Army veteran and Stitch 3D founder, joins us in studio.
Because when we're building Stitch 3D, we have two personas in mind. We're not just building for the service providers, the laser scanners, we're building for their clients in mind as well.
As the data becomes easier to use and easier to access, now you have 100 people in that firm using it. Now you have 300 people. They all should be using some level of this technology.
Don't pigeonhole yourself at any point. I think I just have a shortcut to kind of get into the conclusion. However, if you want to build for any industry, you probably should.
Clark, welcome to the podcast.
Matt, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be in studio with you.
Yeah, I always love in-person interviews. So much more than virtual. I know not everybody can fly out here, but appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk and share some of your story and what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, from San Francisco, it's just a nice direct flight, an hour and a half on the flight. So this is a great opportunity.
Good. Well, thanks for coming in. I really like following kind of a similar flow when I do these conversations. And there's a couple reasons, right? Like, I want to talk about the technologies and what you're working on today. But before we get there, I like going back and hearing a little bit of the journey of, what led to where you are. So maybe take us back as far as you want. I know you started in military, started getting an innovation, and that leads to, maybe even some of the leadership conversation. So take us back a little bit on some of your career journey.
Sure. Yeah. I think if I were to take it all the way back to the beginning, my family immigrated to this country from Taiwan. And prior to that, both my grandfathers fought in the Nationalist Army for China during the Civil War. And of course, they lost that war and they migrated to Taiwan. And so I think growing up, I had always listened to their war stories when they were fighting World War II against the Japanese and then later fighting the Civil War against the communists. So I think early on in my childhood, I had always had a desire to serve in the military. So that led me to West Point. I studied systems engineering at West Point and commissioned as an Army intelligence officer. Served 7 years on active duty, did a deployment to Afghanistan, and then spent about 3 years in South Korea. And during that time, I had obviously a lot of exposure to imagery intelligence, whether it was from satellites, from SAR, from hyperspectral, thermal, and part of that tech stack was always LiDAR. Except I was never part of the collection or the analysis. I was the kind of the end consumer of the data sets as the all-source intelligence officer. So what I would see in front of me would be always like a PDF, kind of like a screenshot of the terrain analysis or a crater volumetric or something like that. Fast forward a little bit, I left active duty in 2019. Started a grad school, did a dual public policy and business degree program. And of course, that was in 2019. So 6 months later, COVID hit and everything kind of shut down. So I was trying to figure out, like what I wanted to do with my life now that all the in-person, kind of like business school opportunities were fully remote, which actually ended up being a great opportunity for me because during the summer of 2020, I participated in a defense innovation accelerator that the National Security Innovation Network, or NSIN, was running. I was paired up with a Navy research lab out in San Diego called the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, or NIWC-PAC. And in particular, one of the labs there, the Restore Laboratory, was using LiDAR to document naval vessels, shipyards, facilities, hangars, things like that. So we were working with them for about 6 to 9 months, trying to figure out if there was a commercialization opportunity here. And two things happened that summer that kind of solidified my desire to kind of go towards the entrepreneurship route. The first was the summer 2020, the USS Bonhomme Richard caught fire in the port of San Diego. And so our lab was out there collecting the LiDAR data. They were using handheld SLAM devices, doing a lot of the investigative work for the Department of Justice. And that was all really great. But, kind of what we realized was actually transferring the data to the DOJ was a huge pain. The second kind of impetus for this was Apple came out with their first LiDAR-enabled iPhone in December 2020, the iPhone 12 Pro. So as I was looking at kind of the business opportunities here, the market expansion opportunities, as well as the pain points faced in both commercial and the military, That's when I decided, okay, like I'm just going to focus on entrepreneurship after grad school, and that's how I ended up here.
That's an easy decision, right? Just go and start a company.
Yeah, it was. I had to obviously weigh a lot of the post business school opportunities.
Sure.
I thought I was going to go into finance for a while, but if you look at, or at least for me, like what I really care about is, at the end of the day, enabling national security. I think for my family, when we immigrated here, it was around the time of the third Taiwan Strait crisis, and so. Back then, the U.S. Navy could sell 2 aircraft carrier groups to Taiwan Straits and kind of keep the peace. That's no longer the case, right? Like technology is the greatest deterrent in modern warfare. And I think for the last 20 years, since we've kind of been in Afghanistan and Iraq, where it's relatively low tech, a lot of our capabilities have diminished a little bit relative to other great powers. So as I think about how do I contribute to national security in the future, I thought, being a defense tech, dual use tech entrepreneur could be a great way to do that.
Yeah. So how did you start? Like, so you getting out of military decided you saw a gap and wanted to build a platform?
Pretty much. So I think going back to my first exposure with point clouds and LiDAR, it was in Afghanistan in 2014. And this is like the early days of drones and aerial LiDAR imagery. And a lot of the LiDAR data we were actually taking wasn't even off of drones, it was off of airplanes. And, we would go and scan a large, terrain and do some terrain analysis on it. But that data would come off of the airplane, take a day or two to actually get to, somebody's desktop, and then it would take another 4 or 5 days to actually be processed. And then by the time it actually hit the desk, like my desk or, our team's desk, that data would be 7 to 10 days out of date, right? So it wasn't like very timely data. And furthermore, if we wanted to actually transfer that data from one side of the base, I was in Jalalabad, from one side of the base to another side of the base, perhaps giving it to partner nations or to conventional units, we would basically download it to a desk or to a hard drive, put it in a backpack, and drive it over there. There was just a lot of friction in terms of accessing that data. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind. But in 2014, I just thought that was the way the world worked with these kinds of data sets. When that was still the case in 2020, and we were literally burning point clouds to Blu-ray discs to ship to different DOJ offices around the country, I was like, all right, well, what's going on here? Why can't this all be on the cloud? Why is accessibility such a big pain point for this industry? And so kind of just looking at it from like a business school perspective, thought that maybe there's something I could do here.
Makes me just think of kind of the point of like curiosity is what leads to a lot of innovation. Like people actually trying to accomplish these things, because, what we hear a lot across all industries, right? Especially those of us that are looking at innovative technologies, what we hear a lot is it's always been done that way, right? This data is big, it's heavy. Everyone is still, there's different reasons people still struggle with the data. But to actually take the step of like how to solve it and start building a platform for it, there's not very many people I think that would take that, that step. What were some of your initial challenges as you started to think about how you would accomplish this?
I guess from like a founding business challenge, and then I'll talk about a little bit about that, and then also from like a tech perspective.
Cool. Yep.
In terms of, starting a business during business school during COVID was, in hindsight, not the best time to do it. Just because when you're in business school, everyone's kind of in this honeymoon phase where they are kind of in their either in a transition phase of their career or they're in an exploratory phase. When you're trying to start a business, it's a very long-term, serious undertaking. And it's not a school project. And so if you're trying to start a business with your classmates, I think the first thing you need to kind of identify is if you're on the same trajectory in terms of your risk appetite and your desire to actually be entrepreneurs. So when I started the company, I actually had 2 co-founders that were also in business school, and they were a year ahead of me in terms of their kind of progression through business school. So they were getting ready to graduate. And so when the time came, we had really only incorporated, like nothing had been built. We were still doing some customer interviews. We had done a pilot with the Coast Guard, but nothing had been built yet. And so going through that transition phase from having, 2 co-founders to being a solo founder, that was challenging. And I learned a lot through that process. From a tech perspective, I I'm not a technical founder.
Yeah.
My background is in business and finance and operations, and I guess you could talk a little bit about like leadership in the military. But I needed to find someone who can actually help me co-found this company and actually build out the product. And so actually the person I turned to was my childhood best friend back in Michigan. His name is Jeff Jakinovich, and initially, he was kind of dubious about this. Like, I've never heard of LiDAR before. Like, what is 3D? You know, he's very good at building SaaS products, but it's like, you know, SaaS in service of 3D. He didn't think he was able to do that. But then after bringing him on initially just as a contractor and exposing him to the problem sets, we started to kind of just like work through some of the challenges of building the tech. And it's a continuous learning process because the data sets, the infrastructure, everything surrounding like 3D graphics on the web is changing so rapidly. And so we had to make some serious decisions about, okay, this is what we're going to build and this is what we're not going to build, instead of trying to build for everything all at once, which, as you know, is probably a very quick way to kill an idea.
Yeah.
So, happy to dive into either one of those.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun to talk through all of them. But yeah, I think maybe we do dig into a little bit of like what the initial core problems you're trying to solve is. I love the comment, you know, when you talk about there are so many things to build, right?
Yeah.
Someone said it at our conference last year in our innovation panel was, you know, the killer of a great idea is 5 great ideas, right? Like there are so many problems to solve. How you go about picking, like, where do we start? What's our core target? I could imagine being challenging because the technology is changing so much. There's so many data types. There's so many things you could do with the data. So maybe we circle there to like, how did you go about picking where you're going to, you know, where is the core focus?
Yeah.
What those areas are.
Yeah. I think, if you look at scaling in an industry and you kind of like mirror that to Maslow's like hierarchy of needs, at the foundational layer of that pyramid, what we saw the biggest challenge is data accessibility. Right now, folks are, you know, still working with a lot of on-prem servers, desktop devices, and desktop software, and they're shipping, you know, thumb drives or hard drives, or they're getting this data onto a Google Drive, Dropbox, you know, share file, and they're sharing a link. But on the receiving end of that for their clients, there's no easy way to actually access and consume this data. If you're sharing a Dropbox link, there's no preview. You have to download 20, 50, 100 gigabytes of data, run it through a desktop software that might be kind of complex to use in terms of the user interfaces and the buttons you need to learn. So there's a lot of friction in just the base layer of getting accessibility to the data in the industry that we thought should be the first thing we solve for. And then once you go above that, then there's like, okay, there's visualizations, there's analytics, there's collaboration, there's, you know, layering of different data sets. But at the foundational layer, we said, can we just replace Dropbox for a lot of users' workflows? So Sys3D 1.0 was basically that. We built data management on the cloud. We built a viewer on top of that, and we built some basic analytical tools. I think where we're going in the future is now we're starting to layer on top of that more advanced capabilities, whether it's, you know, georeferencing and point cloud, aligning multiple data sets together, creating a stronger foundation for how users can access the viewer, building in real-time collaboration, you know, kind of that Google Doc, Figma flow where you can have multiple cursors flying around and interacting with his data in real time. And a lot of this inspiration was driven by my time in the military as an intel officer, you know, thinking through, you know, back when I was the consumer of the data, what would be useful for me? If an operator was out on a site and they had to do a sensitive site exploitation, which just means after an operation, they need to take pictures and photos and videos of everything. Can they do a 3D scan of this operation, load it into the cloud, and then I can communicate in real time with that operator?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, though, it was like, let's solve for data accessibility first.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. Now I have a question specifically around, you know, you're coming from the military side, the government side, and yet you're looking at like cloud. What was some of your mindset going into that, knowing, at least from an outside, like I've never worked in the government, but I've seen a lot of, you know, maybe question mark or concerns from either government projects or from, you know, large enterprises that are afraid of the cloud. And like, how did you approach kind of the security, you know, questioning, or even being that really where you started was within that environment?
Right.
How did you think about that as you were starting with it?
Yeah. So actually our entry point to working with military end users was through two channels. One was through what's known as a CRADA. It stands for Cooperative Research and Development Agreement with Navy, with the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific Restore Laboratory. The other is through the SBIR STTR program, the SBIR and SITR, which stands for Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer. Those two programs are managed by the Small Business Administration, and every every branch of the federal government has access to SBIR R&D funding. It's essentially a way for the government to work with small businesses on an R&D basis. So with the CRADA, the work that we were doing was jointly shared with the Navy. So in terms of like any of the data that we were collecting and the data that we were processing was already on a DoD network. Okay. So we didn't have to get clearance to work with them because the CRADA was already kind of covering the scope of that. With the SBIR, though, that was different because the SBIRs, basically, our SBIR sponsor was the Air Force through AFWorks, which is run by the Air Force Research Laboratory. Once AFWorks awards you a SBIR contract, you are responsible for performing the R&D and then delivering that R&D to an Air Force end user. While you're in R&D phase, there are certain programs that the NSA provides that allows you to host government data if you are doing software in the cloud that provides coverage for you. However, that doesn't translate neatly towards procurement. Once you are actually looking at procurement and commercial solution offerings, OTA, or other transaction authorization contracts, now you need to have what's known as an ATO, or an authority to operate certification. And that's a long, drawn-out process. So we're currently in the process of transitioning from a SBIR contract towards a CSO, a commercial solution offering contract, at which point we basically need to, go through all the checklists, make sure that we're, securely storing this data, making sure that there's no, third-party access to the data. That becomes a very big hurdle for us to clear. But obviously, like, the opportunity to work with the military is worth that investment.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe even while we're on that topic where you're explaining some of these contracts and opportunities with government, I know in conversation we've had in the past, you've mentioned some of that where, like, I think a lot of this industry around these technologies maybe don't even know, like, that that's an option or it exists or it's a way. Could you give some thought to that piece for small businesses? And, like, I mean, it seems like a really incredible place that you started where a lot of people are like, oh no, like that's really hard, to get, or there is no way to get into it, or, would you share more around those programs?
Sure. Yeah. So it all seems kind of like scary on the outside looking in because, for folks that are not from the military, it's like, do you need to know somebody in the military? Do you need to have sponsorship already before you apply for a program? And my answer to that is no. So if I were to walk somebody who's never done this before through the process, the first step is to determine, specifically for SBIRs, does your technology meet the R&D requirement? It has to be R&D. It can't be a commercial off-the-shelf solution that you're trying to sell to the government because that's not the right channel for it. The government's trying to fund R&D, which they believe is going to help grow the economy through innovation, and the military, the government in general, is one to back innovation funding. So number one is determining, do I have an R&D product here, or is it primarily services or products I'm trying to sell? If it's the latter, then it's probably not a good fit for SBIR. There's other ways to sell to the military. If you decide that there is an R&D angle to what you're doing, then the next step is determining, like, which branch of the government you're trying to sell to. Is it NASA? Is it the Department of Energy? Is it the Department of Defense? Department of Education? So all of these departments have SBIR funding. By far, the biggest pot of that is the Department of Defense. So for us, we looked at, just because of my background, we looked at the DoD, and specifically within the DoD community, the Air Force was pretty robust in terms of their program around SBIRs. And what we did was we just applied for an open topic. An open topic SBIR, I think it gets released twice a year. And you can track all of this on the DSIP portal. It's the Defense SBIR Innovation Program portal, dsip.gov, dsip.gov. Cool. So you can go there and you can see, like, there's solicitations for specific solutions. And then twice a year, the government will just say, we don't know what we want. We're going to leave it open topic. And then you can basically pitch us your solution. So we basically pitched them building a SaaS product for managing, visualizing, and sharing 3D point clouds. And that was picked up by the Air Force. Very cool. Through the open topic, there's three different phases for the SBIR. Phase one is typically $50,000 to $110,000. Phase 2 ranges from $750,000 to $1.25 million. And then phase 3 is procurement. So you're negotiating directly with the end user for procuring the product.
Cool.
All phase 1 is the Air Force funds you for 3 months to do customer discovery. So you have a solution that you're working on, and you have access to Air Force end users, or, if it's the Air Force SBIR, or, the DoD end users, and you basically tell them, hey, this is what we're building. Air Force Research Lab thinks that there's application here. We want to confirm if you believe that's true. For us, we pitched civil engineering squadrons. And the use case I had in mind was airfield damage assessments, right? Because at the time, Ukraine conflict was kicking off, and airfields are critical infrastructure that's typically taken out during the first phases of conflict. How do you quickly collect volumetric data of a cratered runway, and then aggregate that information together, deliver to the explosive ordnance folks, the civil engineers, the intel guys, and then have everyone looking at the same, at the same data. Then the civil engineering squadron folks were very interested in that. So then they decided to sponsor us for phase 2. We had to write a proposal, send it back to the Air Force Research Lab, and say, hey, this is what we're going to do specifically with this unit. For us, it was the 6th Civil Engineering Squadron down at MacDill Air Force Base. This is what their problem is. Of course, MacDill and Tampa, they're not dealing with cratered runways from bombs. They're dealing with sinkholes in Tampa, Florida. So we wrote it like that, but with the idea that if this use case is resolved, then you can use it for any kind of similar adjacent use cases. So then that was picked up. We worked with the 6th Civil Engineering Squadron for about 12 months, developed the product using non-dilutive capital from the government. You don't have to go raise VC funding to supplement this.
Very cool.
And then it allowed us to launch a commercial product from that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really cool route that I would bet most people have no idea exists. And the other thing that I think is cool about that story and that angle, even for you though, is I think a lot of great companies, products are also launched by people who have experienced the pain point.
Yeah.
Right. Because even everything you just explained, right, anybody could do. But who all knew that was a use case within the military, that is something that they have to deal with, that there's not a platform for? Like, as an outsider, if I think about some of the other people maybe in our community, right, that are scanning people, they wouldn't have even thought of that use case. Right. And so I think that's where maybe a lot of small businesses or people that want to go out and create something struggle is maybe they have the drive to try, but they're not coming from an internal place where they're trying to solve a problem that they've lived or they know exists. So it's kind of cool to hear that exists, and it could be easy to pursue or pitch but it sounds like you also have had that experience to know the pain points they have.
Yeah. I would say probably the biggest advantage I have versus somebody who's like never been in the military and coming from this as like a true outsider is I have an understanding of how the military operates. I already have an understanding of the strategic priorities based on, okay, we're moving away from Central Command because we're not operating in Iraq and Afghanistan anymore, and turning our attention to the Pacific Command because China. And when you start to like frame it in terms of strategic priorities down to operational priorities to tactical opportunities that a small business could go after, if we just look at Indo-PACOM, for example, with the headquarters in Hawaii, like what they're doing right now is they're getting ready for great power competition in the Western Pacific. So what they're doing is they're clearing a ton of islands that used to be Air Force bases back in World War II. But after World War II, we no longer needed those bases anymore. So the airfields, while still operational, have been overtaken by the jungle. And so now they're flying a ton of operations, mapping the terrain, looking at the tree the elevation of the trees, the vegetation that they need to clear, so that they can send in the heavy civil engineering equipment to clear some of those airfields. Now, you can find all this information on CNN, but I think where my advantage is, like, I just kind of already know where the strategic direction is going. And so when I'm talking to end users, I'm talking to them with that kind of information already in the back of my mind. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, I think that's the best that anybody can do, whether they're building a platform or they're trying to sell a service or whatever, is the better you can know the problems of the client or of the, what that use case is. It's
it's a lot better to try to address an actual use case than just try to sell hey, I have this product or I have this service, really understanding the problem that they have, because then you're able to kind of guide your pitch, your proposal, your suggestions to like, hey, is this a pain point? Because I know it's going this way and this is the current option. Like you can really guide them along the path to get to like why they then realize they need what you're offering.
That's such a good point, Matt, because what I just said is like, it's not exclusive information. I think I just have a shortcut to kind of get into the conclusion. However, if you want to build for any industry, you probably should get to know your customer very well.
Yep.
Whether it's going on a job site with them, doing market research, doing user interviews, you should be doing all that anyways. It's just that with the military, there's, a lot of users to talk to for a lot of different applications.
So being that you kind of have started from this military side, and that obviously has been a focus, you've gotten to work on some of these projects with the government. Yeah. How does that translate to your thought with like what you see in the rest of the industry and some of the other either gaps or opportunities, or, how are you looking at other industries?
So I think there's this term, going around Silicon Valley called dual use, technology. And in my opinion, that's more of a categorization than a specific vertical, right? Because if you think about it, like a lot of the military technologies that were invented using government funding and DARPA and Air Force Research Lab, Army Research Labs, they have commercial applications, and vice versa. A lot of commercially funded technologies have military applications. I think traditionally the line has been drawn in terms of like what can be used by the military and what can be used commercially. Whereas if you look at China, like everything is dual use. Like every technology developed by the commercial sector or by the government kind of fits in both. So when I was looking at this problem, I wasn't looking at it from the perspective of like, I want to build a military only capability. And when we started doing, user interviews with, drone service providers, surveyors, engineers, architects, we realized that a lot of the pain points that we face in the military were shared by industry. Namely, no one really has good answers to accessibility. No one really has good SaaS solutions to manage their businesses, manage their products, manage their data. So we said, okay, like there obviously is a dual use opportunity here. If we build it for the military versus building for the commercial sector, the pain point we're addressing is the same. And so I think a lot of that just goes back to, you got to do your homework. You got to talk to the users and figure out like what they care about. For us, it was more of a go-to-market decision. Do we want to go to market first with defense, or do we want to go to market first with commercial? And for us, like with the sales cycle in defense, like we had to go commercial first, and specifically looking at helping the small businesses first get off the ground, managing their data, and going from there. Yeah,
very cool. I kind of want to go back even again to maybe the founding story a little bit, just because I think it's unique to hear from entrepreneurs, from business owners, of that journey of starting, because there's so many people out there. And I even look at this industry in whole and say like, I believe that the need for this technology is going to outpace the industry's ability to perform it, like scanning and modeling and scan to BIM and like all this analysis. And, so I actually think our industry could use more founders in different areas, whether you're building a service company or you're looking at different products or you're, whatever it be. So I like to even hear from owners on their journey to hopefully even inspire other people who, I think there's a lot of innovators and a lot of people that could be good founders that are stuck in a big company in the corporate cog and wheel, that people are afraid to start companies too. It's risky. It's scary. There's unknown. Go back to that a little bit. Like what was your mindset like stepping into, taking that step away from a normal job and starting a business? Like what were you really thinking, going into that? Was there fear? Was there hesitation? What's your mindset around that?
So you and I talked a little bit about this because I think, like I was saying at dinner last night, like one of the best questions I've ever been asked during an interview is, what's something that you strongly believe in that almost no one else believes in? Which at the heart of that question is, the interview was trying to discern, what kind of contrarian views I have that you can actually go out there and make business decisions around.
Yep.
This was for a finance interview, but when you think about that mindset, that applies to a lot of different industries. When I think about my time as an intelligence officer, you're trying to piece together very different streams of intelligence, data, and there's also a lot of noise, right? So, number one, I think if a good entrepreneur has to be curious, they have to ask questions, and they have to be motivated to assess the situation and to try to drive towards some sort of meaningful solution. And I think for me, it was I took that intelligence background, looking at obviously in the military is for targeting and for kind of force protection, things like that, and then applying to business. It's okay, I can make a bet on my career right now, and if I go into a traditional kind of post MBA career, this could be the upside versus how much do I want to bet on myself? There's a ton of risk, but here's the opposite upside and also the downside. The second thing you have to be really real with yourself about is your risk profile. I think I've always been a little bit more risky. I like to go to the casinos. I like to play blackjack. I like to, travel and take risks and kind of open myself up to opportunities, but at the same time, also opening myself up to risk. So it depends on, the stage of your life. If you're, just graduating school and you have a family to support, it's a big financial burden.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things just lined up for me where I looked at the risk, I looked at the opportunity, and I looked at the potential for the market to really kind of grow into a big opportunity here, and said, okay, this is worth studying.
Yeah.
And then from there, the journey really begins. All right, you got to ask a lot of questions. You got to figure out what people care about.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you that this industry is moving so quickly. It could really do good with a lot more entrepreneurs trying to solve problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I like hearing that. I think there's the statistic, right, of I'm going to be so off with my percentages, but is it 80% of small businesses, close within the first few years? It's a huge number. And I think usually there's a lot of factors that go into that, bad business model or, not finding a fit, based on the business they're building. Or I also think there's a lot of people that aren't meant to be founders. The journey is not what a lot of people look at it to be, right?
Yeah.
Today's social media world has made entrepreneurship that means you get millions of dollars and you retire early, right? Yeah. It's no. For 99% of entrepreneurs, it is you're working way harder, way longer, long nights. You're grinding for a long time to try to build something that you believe in. And it might turn into a successful business, or you might just grind forever until you're burnt out and you quit, like the other, the 70, 80, whatever % of small businesses. And I think that comes down to who you truly are, knowing yourself, knowing why it is that you want to build that thing, which is actually, I guess, what I'd even question to you is you hear people talk about that cliche of, find your why, right? What is your why? But I think that behind the scenes, it really is what helps people power through the difficulties of building and running a small business or scaling with all the effort that goes into it. So for you, what is it that, what is your why? What is it that truly pushes you? I'm sure you've had those points that are difficult, the late nights, the, difficult decisions to make, things like that, I think a lot of people would actually just want to give up at. What is it that pushes you through those things? Yeah.
So before I seriously considered entrepreneurship as a career, I guess my higher calling has always been, a deep fear for me has always been a potential World War III scenario where the U.S. and China go to war with each other over a conflict in Taiwan. It's somewhere, I have family. My grandparents came from China. I grew up in the U.S., went to West Point and was in the Army. So I feel like there's, kind of a lot of just forces in my life that have made me care deeply about trying to do my part to prevent that conflict from happening. And so, that's why I studied public policy. And then when I looked at what can I immediately make an impact on, it wasn't going to be, going into the bureaucracy and trying to climb that ladder. It wasn't going to be going into finance. And something that I experienced a lot of pain with in the military was our technology procurement process has always been kind of broken, right? And so even though you can see how quickly commercial innovation is moving, defense innovation has been very stagnant, I would say probably since like the late 90s, right? Not a lot of new innovation had been happening. And then it wasn't until Ash Carter was in office and he stood up a lot of the innovation capabilities around the institutional structures to help the military turn this, massive aircraft carrier, if you will, around and kind of pursue more agile, innovative work. And I was one of the teaching assistants for the late, Secretary Carter. And he and I had a lot of discussions during grad school. It's like, okay, like what can you do immediately to be, beneficial or helpful for where, the state of the country is going in terms of national security. And so that's when, for me, not only did I see obviously a business upside here, but it aligned with my core values in terms of promoting peace and stability through now technology deterrence. That has allowed me to, be fueled through the late nights, the long hours. It's like, all right, well, look, there is actually a higher purpose here. You're just not in uniform anymore. You're building to support the warfighter, but it's all for a good cause, hopefully in the end. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, again, and I that's why I like hearing about those, because usually, I think good founders and business leaders, again, they have a certain pain point they've lived. And then they also have certain things they're passionate about, that when you can find a way for those two things to meet and cross over, whether you're, again, entrepreneur, founder or not, or you just find that role in a company, or you find somebody to align with who has that, shared mission, or the company aligns with it, or the people you're working around align with it. It's really, I think, what can help people thrive and be above average, be a an excellent worker, willing to put in that extra level to whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that. What are some of the things that you see as current, apart from the data sharing and the, the challenges in the industry there, when you look at all the other technologies that are, coming out that are affecting the industry, like, are there other technologies that have your eye, or that you see as interesting, that also play into the same realm?
I think a lot of it is very exciting, obviously, when you look at the way that AI is moving so many industries. And obviously AI has kind of entered the 3D reality capture realm with, nerves and Gaussian splatting. And you don't have to take 1,000 photos anymore. You can just take a video and, stitch together a pretty accurate 3D model. A lot of the SLAM technologies that are out there now for handheld devices that you can very quickly capture a pretty good point cloud for. A lot of the hardware capabilities are moving so quickly. What I think is getting left behind is the management and organization of all that data. And I think that's where software can really come into play. Yeah. Right. Because that's what software does. It allows you to organize a lot of different, big data streams into a easily digestible channel. Yep. And for us, we think as the data proliferates and there's more sources for collecting it, there's more applications that you're using it for. Where we kind of want to be positioned is, how do we help users manage all that data? Not only manage the data, but also manage their business in terms of managing their client experiences, managing the delivery of that data to their clients. So we're big proponents for, innovation in the industry, because we believe that the more data channels are out there, the better it is for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. I really think, software and solutions to utilize the data is the biggest area for disruption, because, over the last several years, the amount of hardware that has scaled, that has come out, that has changed, the price has reduced, like the amount of data that's being captured just continues to get, so massive. Right. And as devices are coming, cheaper, faster, it's also letting new industries that couldn't do it before. 10 years ago, huge scanners, super expensive, slow. Like it was a very select group of people that were scanning. Today, it is literally entering like every industry, from real estate, from doing it for virtual tours, from oil and gas facilities, warehouses, roads, bridges, like I literally say, I think, over time, every asset on earth is going to be captured, right? Like, because there's a use to use reality capture devices, whichever one it is, right? Doesn't matter if it's a SLAM device, a drone, a scanner, or whatever. The need to capture existing conditions of buildings, of facilities, of whether it's for asset management or it's for construction jobs or it's for engineering or whatever the use, there's so many uses. There's reasons everything needs to be captured. That's just, it's a ongoing, never ending, massive amount of information. And yet, historically, the amount of people that actually use the data has been very small.
Yeah.
Just random numbers here, but if we took, for example, a construction company that had 1,000 employees, there's probably a team of 7 people that know how to use a scanner or use the point cloud data or use the photogrammetry data. And they have to then figure out like, well, how do I turn this back into something to give access to other people? And so looking at, again, whether a cloud-based solution, whether, new software that's not created yet that uses AI to make more innovative deliverables, like the innovation that can happen around platforms or software to take all this imagery, take all these point clouds, take all these models and actually do intelligent things with them is what will really spread the adoption to where now that 1,000-person construction company, it's not this little tiny team that everyone else has to wait on to figure out when can I capture, how can I use it? As the data becomes easier to use and easier to access, now you have 100 people in that firm using it. Now you have 300 people. At some point, you get to the point that anyone who touches drawings, models, visualization, site walks, tours, project management, they all should be using some level of this technology.
I think you hit it right on the head, Matt. For us, not only is that, in our opinion, a sure way to grow the market in terms of like, if you're doing market sizing, things like that. You grow the market not through creating more surveyors and people with the domain expertise and actually collecting the data, processing the data, classifying the data. You grow the market in terms of who is asking for that data, the end consumers of that data. And so when we were building Stitch 3D, I approached it from my experience as a consumer of the data, as an intelligence officer. I didn't know how to use ArcGIS. I wasn't, on the software, actually creating the outputs. I was a consumer of that data. And we were building for the Air Force. The lieutenant colonel of the civil engineering squadron, basically his guidance for us was, you got to build the software in such a way that any 18-year-old airman coming out of basic training can go onto the software, click a few buttons, and create deliverables that we can all look at. And they might not, they're definitely not drone pilots. They're not certified land surveyors, but they can use the software as a force multiplier for making that intelligence useful to a lot more people. Yep.
Yeah. And I think like you even mentioned earlier, when you talked about that your initial focus being military, but you find a lot of the same problems in industry, like that's the same example there, right? Most people on a construction site are like, I don't want to learn how to use that robot, or, get that AR headset out of my face. Like they're doing their old way. They're used to this certain process. So in order to expand the adoption or the interest of those people that are not techie people, you get an old construction guy who's been out there doing it the same way for 20, 30 years, whatever. In order for him to have any interest and actually adopt the use of this, it needs to be really easy to use. Mm-hmm. It needs to be, there needs to be enough value in using it that it replaces the hurdle of learning how to use it. That's another thing I think for the management of change, the change process for a company to adopt a new tool or adopt a new hardware or adopt a new platform is like, even if it's valuable, is the value high enough to overcome the challenge of adoption?
Yep.
And that's where it's like, the easier you can make it, the more seamless to get people to just access the data, log in. Are they used to browsing Google Street View? Are they used to, like, what's something they're used to doing, and how can we make our platforms seamless and obvious in how they can use it? I agree. I think all of those are ways to help increase the adoption and grow the market. And I would say from my perspective, we try to educate and talk about both angles, right? Mm-hmm. I want to help grow the whole market, mm-hmm. but then I also want to help grow the users, because I honestly think right now the path that the industry on, I said it earlier, is I think the market awareness is starting to grow enough mm-hmm. that the demand is really on a curve that is steeper than the growth of people actually coming in to perform it well. Mm-hmm. So, if tons of companies over the next couple years start demanding laser scanning all the time, and now we don't have enough skilled laser scanning people, yep. that we're going out and doing bad work because random people are buying scanners and don't know how to use them. Like, to me, I see this need to educate both at the same time, of the users of the technology who want to adopt it and actually do the service, and then also, the end client and the accessibility, and you got to scale both. Otherwise, I think one will be in trouble.
Man, that resonates so much with us, because when we're building Stitch 3D, we have two personas in mind. We're not just building for the service providers, the laser scanners. We're building for their clients in mind as well. It's like when a service provider delivers data to their client, how easy is it for that client to open up a Stitch 3D viewer, click a few buttons, and get the insights they need from it. There needs to be kind of a joint operation here. Yeah, where you're educating both sides of the market, and that's how the market becomes more robust.
Yeah. Without getting, you don't have to get super specific here if you don't want to, but being that you're building a platform, I'm curious. When you look at other platforms that exist that are maybe, similar in some ways, but have gaps in others mm-hmm. or overlap, you've mentioned some of the initial hurdles that you want to try to tackle, right? Replace the Dropbox, come up with some of these better data management. What would you say if someone, which I'm sure you probably get the question from end users or something, is how is what you're building different from some of the other, solutions that are out there that are trying to compete in the market as well? Yeah. Without saying names or giving away your secret sauce, what would you respond to that with?
Sure. So, and we get this question all the time from our investors, because, what I basically, tell our employees, our investors, anyone who has this question, is in the early days of the industry kind of becoming an industry even, people are building for vertical applications. They're building specifically for an engineering, construction use case, or they're specifically building for a forestry, vegetation management use case, or they're building for whatever use case, right? Mm-hmm. They're building vertical tooling to support an industry pain point. Mm. In my opinion, I think the industry is getting to a turning point, a tipping point, if you will, where there's a lot of horizontal accessibility that face the same issues, data accessibility being one of them, right? So there's an opportunity to build a horizontal platform that users can upload their data to and then manage their business from. Whereas before, that market was probably too small for businesses to probably try to build towards. Where we see an opportunity to build for a horizontal application here, where we can service multiple industries in terms of data management, data accessibility, customer management, customer metrics and insights and things like that. So I would say for us, the two kind of things we want to build towards is an easier way of managing your business if you are a service provider on the cloud, right? Yeah. Not just your business, but also managing your clients on the cloud. And then also building in collaborative features, because in order for it to be networked, in order for it to be a network solution, you have to have engagement from both sides of that, consumer and provider side of the market. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is and obviously building a horizontal platform, something that's kind of always been in the back of my mind is how do we collaborate with a lot of these companies that are building for vertical tools? And so we've been kicking around an idea of creating kind of like a marketplace where if you have built a very cool segmentation tool for counting trees, you can plug that into Sys3D, and then, your clients now can use, that very cool tree counting tool, but never have to move their data off of any kind of like, any data management platform. So that's always kind of been an idea that I've been kicking around.
Yeah. I love that idea. Just thinking about my past, years being in software platforms. And it's like, I think one of the challenges a lot of people face right now is the silos of so many different software platforms.
Right.
And they got to go to so many different ones or get all these different tools to be able to, to be able to create something they want. I was actually re-listening to an interview a while back where, someone was talking about that. They had to go to 4 different softwares to create this one deliverable they wanted. When I think about like a marketplace type thing, or, just like apps and stuff, right? Like if you have the main foundation built, but then other companies who have certain expertise could create a plugin to do certain features. And then, different industries, different users have different needs. They can just get the features they need instead of several different softwares. It's like same underlying,
right?
But maybe specific tools that are really for the forestry guy or for the surveyor or for the, I think it's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah, a pain point we keep hearing is like, I don't want to keep moving my data from one software to another software to another software to another software, only to deliver it in like a final software.
Yes.
It's like that data movement takes time. Every time you download and upload the data, is like, you don't know if the integrity is being kept. So it's like, can you just create a platform for me where I can host all my data and then like turn on the tools that I want to complete certain, workflows and tasks?
Yeah, no, honestly, it is a huge issue because, the different platforms take different file types. You got to convert them. You have to import them. You have to export them. And when you're talking about a company or an industry that is starting to use this data a lot, and you're dealing with importing and exporting hundreds of gigs of point clouds or terabytes of point, like it's days and days, literally, of export time, of transfer time, of upload time, and that's where, on top of just a place to store your data, if you can condense it to where it's replacing multiple tools, it saves a lot of time. And, the saying, time is money. Time is one of the most valuable things. Everybody wants to know if it can be done faster. We needed it yesterday. We need, again, back to your original pain point of being in the military and having to wait days to get a hard drive, right? Sometimes time is the most important metric.
Absolutely.
Not every time, but sometimes. And so anything that can help speed up the life cycle of a project, I think is definitely valuable in the industry.
Yeah.
If we go back to leadership a little bit, kind of curious if you have any principles, when it comes to leadership that you live by, or, quotes you've heard or books you've read, things as a leader, as a founder, as an owner, someone who has to lead others, who has to deal with, the pros and cons that come with that, the strengths and difficulties that come with it. Like, what are some of those for you? Any that come to mind?
So I think, like the very early days of my leadership training was obviously at West Point, and there's a very specific leadership training model at West Point where you learn to serve and be led first before you lead, right? So as a freshman, as a sophomore, you really don't have any leadership responsibilities. You're kind of just responsible for yourself, like making your bed, folding your clothes, getting to class on time. Just like, can you take care of yourself? And then once you become a sophomore, you're in charge of one freshman, it's known as a team leader. Then when you're a junior, you're a squad leader or a platoon sergeant. You're in charge of 10 or 40 of your underclassmen, cadets. And then as a senior, you're in charge of maybe like a company or battalion, 100 to 400 to 1,000, cadets. So that process early on where, you learn leadership from a position of followership first, I think is very important. Something that has always stuck with me, kind of like an army saying at least, is your soldiers don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Translate another way from, something I heard from Representative Seth Moulton is like, learn how to smoke a cigarette. Truly, like you could have, have been an amazing cadet, gotten top grades, be physically fit. If you don't care about the people that you're leading, they won't care about you as a leader.
Oh yeah.
And then so like the whole like learn how to smoke a cigarette is like after a really hard day's, work, you've been out on patrol, you've been doing whatever. When you come back to the base, like it's just like, hey, go do what your soldiers are doing. If they're smoking a cigarette, go smoke a cigarette with them. If they're, but don't fraternize, of course. Like, I mean, obviously in the military, there's different rules for fraternizing, but you have to know your people, right? You have to be able to empathize with them. And I think for me, like empathy is a superpower for a leader. If you can't get into at least a mindset or, think about what the people you're leading are going through, it's going to be very difficult to lead them anywhere, regardless of how much you know or have experienced yourself.
Yeah.
So,
ooh, that's cool. I've never heard that about West Point in the process. I like hearing it though, because it's it's so true. Like, I think a lot of times people in leadership roles grow to be above everybody, right? Looking down on the employees, and if you reverse it and again, put yourself back in their shoes, right? And that's what that trains you to do, right? In those first couple of years, it's like, I have to be the follower. I need to look up to those people that are leading and learn from them. And I think, being a leader, always looking back at really that person and the role they're in and the mindset they have and how you can help them. Like, I think a big thing for me as in a leadership role is always, how can I actually turn around and be a servant leader? Like, how can I serve the people that work for me? I want to give you the best tools I can to help you do your job. I want you to be successful. I work for you, right? I like that idea of, and then I've never heard the smoke cigarette either.
There's a lot of little, like militaryisms that come up.
Which I guess maybe even the other one a lot of people hear, maybe it came from the military too, is like being in the trenches, right? Like, could have been from the military. I'm not sure where it was originated, but I really like that idea, of good leaders or, and again, sometimes you see like the social media graphic out there or something where it's like a boss is the guy that's on the chair that's making everybody carry it, but a leader is like the guy at the front that's actually helping them pull. Like, I think those are definitely some mindsets that I think make good leaders.
Yeah, I think another mindset for me is that's always kind of stuck with me is leaders eat last. So you want to make sure you take care of your people first, and then you eat last, right? So if you're going through the chow hall and you don't want to be the guy leading the chow line, you want to be the guy making sure all your people are fed first. Not
the guy going first, taking more than he's supposed to.
Right. So a lot of I think obviously the Army is a relationship, as so many industries are, but it's based on relationships. And I think leadership is just it's a little different in the military because it's hierarchical. There is a chain of command. It's kind of like forced leadership in a way, but if you truly want to be able to like lead people and not just manage people, which I think there's a big difference there between leading and managing. It's like, can you actually influence people without using your rank and orders to do so? Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I'm curious if anything comes to mind for this one, if there's anybody that's given you business advice, something that stuck with you. You've got good stuff. I'm just trying to keep extracting it here.
Okay. This is not a business advice. It's more of like a career advice. So I mentioned I was a teaching assistant for Secretary Ash Carter when I was going through the public administration program at Harvard. And the military, first of all, a military career is very planned, right? You serve a certain number of years and you go from lieutenant to captain, and then you serve more years, you go from captain to major. If you do really, really well, you might get promoted like 1 year in advance of your peers, right? So it's like you're kind of moving through your career as a cohort. And so most people in the military, if they're planning for a career, have a 20-year plan. 20 years because that's how long it takes for you to get retirement. So you kind of like have mapped out your entire career trajectory for 20 plus years. When I left the military, that was my way of thinking, was like, all right, I'm going to hit this milestone, hit this milestone, hit this milestone, and then I'll get to where I want to go. Right. And so my first office hour with Secretary Carter, I was like, sir, this is what I'm thinking about doing, grad school right now. And then I'm going to go into finance and go, work for the government. And like, I had it all planned out. Right. And I was like trying to just get feedback on the plan. And he basically said, Clark, do you think I plan to be Secretary of Defense when I was at your age? And there's no way, right? Because like you can't plan for something like that. And so his advice to me was, number one, scrap that kind of mentality where you plan for every outcome, because a lot of the opportunities that come to you in life are serendipitous, where your job sometimes is just to like keep an open door for opportunities that come up. Secondly, wherever you are at, do knock it out of the park. Like, do an incredible job where you're at. So if you are going to go work for a bank, if you are going to go work in consulting, or if you are going to go work at Amazon or Google, be the best person that they've hired so that you give them no reason to fire you. And through doing a good job at those positions, then more doors will open for you. And so I think his career advice for me was like, don't pigeonhole yourself at any point. Because if you pigeonhole your way of thinking about your career, you might actually be missing out on even better opportunities that come up. But since you're not thinking about those opportunities, you won't actually be able to take advantage of them. And that's how I came into entrepreneurship, because that was early on in my grad school days. Entrepreneurship wasn't even on my mind.
Wasn't on your 20-year roadmap?
No way. It was nowhere on that roadmap. But then, COVID happened. I had an opportunity to participate in this, DoD-led accelerator, and I was like, I actually really like, building a small team and building tech, and it still kind of fits with my values of national security. So, yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, no, I like that. Definitely a few points in there that resonate with me. The comment about whatever role you're in, just giving your best. Yeah. Like, to be honest, that is so easy to do, and most people don't do it.
Yep.
Like, over the last 10 years since I started my first company, I have hired and fired so many people, because to find people that literally just show up at whatever their first role is, just foot in the door, first role, just want to show up and work hard and do a good job, and like consistency, and like, not just get distracted, not just feel pulled down, not like just want to go, do fun stuff. Like just finding good workers, just people who are dedicated and just willing to put in the work at what their role is. That's a special person. And yet the people that have done that and that have come in and started in a role and just worked hard, and like, as we as founders, as business owners, we also are on a journey, right, of trying to build this thing and make it work, and we're changing and we're shifting and we have ideas, and the people that just get in and do a good job in whatever role they start in, those people have a lot more opportunity to grow into something bigger as the business grows, as your leader sees you becoming a valuable, loyal worker. Like, a lot of people think that you have to go do something special. I need to go get the master's degree. I need to create this innovative thing or be the owner. There is so much value in being, just a good worker within a team and growing your way into a position. And I think a lot of people, honestly, they get into that first role and they don't even realize that if you just work hard and you be the best at that role, that it will create opportunities you didn't even know exist. And so instead of doing their best, they just kind of like put themselves in this limit, and people even get that mindset of like, I don't want to do that extra effort. That's not my job. Like, I was only hired to do this thing.
Yeah.
Like, man, just like putting yourself outside the box, being willing to be flexible, being agile, being a hard worker, that alone will drive your career.
That's it. Yeah. And I think this is where I'll give a plug for hiring vets, because I think that whole, whether it's West Point basic training or Army basic training or Naval basic training, like the whole idea is like, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Be disciplined, make your bed, in the morning, and like, do the things you're supposed to do, take pride in what you do, but do it for the team.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then like, I think so many opportunities just come from being a good team player and doing your job.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not sound like Coach Belichick, but like, just do your job. Right?
Yeah. Seriously. And you know, when you get into actually, again, this applies whether you're a business owner or not, even if you're a leader of a team, or even if you're on a team and you want to become a leader, the application of this, it goes across the board of like, if you can adopt some of these principles and these mindsets and you just start wherever you are today, start implementing those things, you know, building a team that shares this mindset and shares this vision and shares this passion. I often comment to like it being like a Navy SEAL team within a company is like when you get, this goes back to just what teamwork is like, right? If you will use a football team, right? If you have a really awesome quarterback, an amazing running back, and really good receivers, but your linemen they're not passionate about their job and they're lazy and they want to show up late and how good is that team in whole? Yeah. If you have certain pieces that aren't working, you're not going to the Super Bowl. Yep. You're not even making it to the playoffs. The power of really building a team that all shares that mindset and is tied together and supports one another, and your culture of your company shares that. It makes, to be honest, it makes people that don't fit in that stand out really obviously. Yeah. And when you're in this role that you want to build a company, I want to build a company that is doing something different, that is building something someone else hasn't built, that is going further in a lane that maybe someone else hasn't. You have to have those people. Yeah. If you just want to be a number at some big engineering firm or some big insurance company, or, you know, you can go sit and do your normal amount of hours and not like your job and not like, but if you want to do something great, like you have to adopt these.
Yeah, 100%. Since you mentioned, you know, football teams and Navy SEALs, I think this should be required reading for anyone that's like trying to, you know, do something similar. Is read the Culture Code. It's such a good book. It talks, you know, about how the SEALs basically structure their training programs, how the San Antonio Spurs, you know, like their leadership development training. It's like one of the most influential books for me in terms of thinking about culture and leadership and how to basically build team over talent. Yeah. So I would plug that book.
Good. I haven't read that one, so yeah. Thanks for the recommendation. Man. Any other thoughts that are on your mind right now that we haven't hit on yet? I feel like we've hit a good variety, but anything else that comes to mind for you right now?
I guess this would be more of a question for you, but I'd love to kind of understand like your take on the future state of the industry. For us, you know, obviously there's a separation in my mind between like the drone service providers and the terrestrial laser scanner providers. And like now there's, you know, handheld SLAM devices and Gaussian splat, kind of just like how do you bucket market growth opportunities? I know you think, you know, terrestrial laser scanners and building interiors is going to really and I agree with that as well. Yeah. Any sort of like limitations on drone services because you have to have qualified pilots, waivers, you know, airspace control, like any kind of just like the big market themes. Yeah.
Honestly, for me, I feel like it's all growing rapidly. And there's different applications for all of them, right? Like if we take a normal construction project site, right? Like constant mapping via drone for progress monitoring, for volumetrics, for the actual topography stuff. Like there's so many reasons that drones have grown and they're becoming widely adopted on sites. On the drone side too, a lot of the drone work does not require a super big, expensive, high-end drone. Right. Like, again, this comes down to like, it depends on the use case, depends on the accuracy, depends on the, yes, there are $3,000 drones. There are $300,000 drones. Yeah. There's a need for all of them, but there are so many of the use cases for UAV that are the lower end for the imagery, for the tracking, for those are the drones that are going out doing daily mapping of sites for that progress. If they want super high end accuracy for real, survey topography and all that, it's the higher end and it's all tied to control. But again, the hardware is becoming cheap enough. It's becoming autonomous, right?
Yeah.
You see certain drone companies now with boxes they install on a site. There's not even a person operating it.
Yeah.
It goes out of the box, it maps the site, it goes back, it transfers data. So the more that we see autonomous come into play when it comes to the hardware, the more that is going to just be an automatic, like, yes, we want that on the project.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's doing it. We don't need to train them. Now with scanning, I think autonomous is still a long ways away for most efforts when it comes to like interiors, because buildings and doors and people and just there's so many things that I don't think interior autonomous is going to happen a lot for quite some time.
Yeah.
I think it's close technically with certain robotics companies I've seen use, the Spot Dog with sensors and all this stuff. It can be done, but I don't think it's going to be really adopted and scaled for quite some time. That being said, the amount of data that's created on interiors versus exteriors,
it's way more.
It's massive because, and the other thing I'd say about exteriors, I really think it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple years. Even I just now saw the announcement of Esri and Google.
Yeah, I saw that.
Working closer, together with all these 3D environment. Like, there's stuff like that that's going to happen with the tech behind Gaussian splatting and photogrammetry and satellite and large imagery that I think that we might even get to the point a lot of those basic functions of a job site could get done without drone flights. I'm not sure. Overall, I think it's all going to grow. Yeah. I don't think there's any, drop off of drone scaling, laser scanning scaling. It's all growing still.
Yeah.
I would say drones where they are today are a lot further than scanners.
Yeah.
Scanning, I think, is growing at a faster rate as far as current use and adoption. And again, it's so much data, and it's on the early phase of kind of that drone piece too, where, again, drone used to just go out and map the site once. Yep. Now it's flying every single day. Scanners used to just go scan a building once. Yeah. Now people want it scanned again during progress. Now they want it scanned again at the end for as-built. So I think it's all like got so much room to grow.
Right. I think what's really exciting is that like reality capture is going to feed into so many massive industries. Navigation, autonomous navigation for robots and cars and drones and things like that. A lot of that is going to be based on a 3D map of the world. Yep. Right. Like, so it's like you have the entire city, an entire state, entire country 3D mapped, and that's what's going to feed into a lot of these robotic operating systems for cars and for robots like to move around autonomously. Yep. You have the 3D printing industry, which is going to be based on 3D. Eventually, I think you can go from scan to 3D print. Yep. Which is something that the military is really looking at now, because now that we're looking at a conflict with China, you can't send an entire brigade to like the Philippines. They're just going to get destroyed. You have to send out like a 40-person platoon that operates very much isolated in like the mountains. Yeah. And the problem with that is you don't have the logistical trains to support all those distributed operations. So they need to be able to scan a broken wrench or a machine gun tripod and 3D print it right there on the spot. So you can go from scan to BIM to print. Yep. Obviously with AR, VR, XR, like all these information is getting fed into different displays. Like I think there's so many industries that's going to be founded on digitizing your assets. Yep. And I see a lot of it happening right now with, this change from historically, a single construction project wanted to go scan something because they needed the as-built to now the end owner saying, okay, we see this happening enough, but then the data disappears and we get no value from it. Yep. So as an owner, I would rather have a program where all of my buildings or all of my facilities, all of them are fully mapped. I have all accurate data of what exists. Yep. And now I can choose per project to give access to the architect, give access to the engineer. That is a change that is starting to happen in the industry right now that is going to 100x the amount of volume of capture and data storage and sharing and all of that in the next couple years. Right. even for that building use case, it's like we can give this to law enforcement now in case there's like an emergency or an active shooter. We can give it to the fire department to look at insurance like post fire or whatever. So like that data isn't just used for architecture, engineering, construction anymore. That data could be used by anybody.
Well, and see, this is something that I think is interesting too, and I think there could be more solution to than is happening now. Is a lot of times I think there's the same asset that gets captured in different ways by different groups for different values. You know, you take a building, for example. Historically, the architect might have hired someone to come out and scan it for them because they needed it for their architectural design. And then they didn't talk to someone else. And then the mechanical guy also went out and scanned a thing because he wanted it for HVAC. And so like the more open and understanding there is around the potential of this data and that the whole team can value from it, then I think that's what's also starting to drive the owner being the one who's wanting that data as well. And then that can lead to, even outside of the construction project, what else can be done with that data back to the law enforcement, back to other use cases, from safety to training to the city to environment, whatever. But right now, you know, again, that comes now down to like who owns the data and privacy concerns. And so there's all kinds of things that I think have to be worked through there. But my true like thought on, you know, the future, and I don't think it's going to be like way out there, is that literally every building and every facility will have an entire digital twin, if we want to throw that fun buzzword out there. I literally think every asset, starting with major buildings, major facilities, will have a complete digital replica that, whether it is archived and saved for when they need it for a renovation, or it is a company that is actually pursuing a digital twin program where they actually use it for maintenance and they're linking live data and they're using it as a management tool. I really think we get to the point that that is a normal, it is a requirement, even if it becomes government demanded, right? Like right now, projects have to go submit to the city, you know, old 2D drawing sets still. That is the way to submit drawings. At some point, it is all going to be a digital process. You're going to have either a full, whatever the requirement or standard is at that point, a full scan or a full mesh or a full built out model to a certain accuracy to submit for approval when a project is done. That's gonna be the normal.
Yeah, that's so exciting too. Like couldn't agree with you more. I think that's gotta be the way of the future. But what a cool opportunity to kind of be at the early stages of this industry really taking off.
It is. It's, you know, a lot of it's been around for a long time, but I think the volume of interest and the variety of industries that have interest, the price point of the hardware coming down, the accessibility through software happening, all of these things are happening at the same time that are making it possible for it as an industry to actually scale and become a major part of so many industries. And the other thing that, you know, I say often in my talks on innovation is, you know, quote, I think it's attributed to a few different people, but the best way to predict the future is to create it. Like literally the community we're building, the visibility we're building, the experts that are collaborating, we can actually impact that adoption, that demand. We can voice for, you know, working with government to say we should move from these 2D to the model. We can, we as a group can actually help really influence how this looks in the future, how fast we get there, what those requirements are. So that's what's exciting to me about having so many cool people working together and really getting behind this community idea and collaboration idea is, it's actually going to make an impact on the direction of the industry.
I'm super excited for it. And obviously we're very grateful for you, Matt, and your support and kind of like mentorship and feedback as we're building for this industry. And hopefully we can build software that helps grow the entire, you know, that is that tide that raises all ships, you know, whether it's for the service provider or the data consumers. You know, we want to help this industry grow. Appreciate it. Well, I look forward to watching the journey continue to unpack for you. And again, appreciate you coming out, sharing some of your story, some of your mindset. And I'm sure it won't be the last time the community hears from you. Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right. Thank you again. We'll see you guys next time.